So you've already heard quite a lot this morning and this afternoon about upstream thinking. What I'm aiming to cover in my talk is more about the delivery, how it works in practice. So as Martin and Lawrence outlined earlier, the upstream thinking project, as it runs at the moment, is a result of PR09, which is the price review 09, and runs from 2010 to 2015. So within that, delivery of those outputs is being managed, if you like, through a whole range of partners. And South West Water, as all of us are very proud of the fact that it's a partnership that involves public, private and third sector organisations. The strategy, as Martin detailed earlier, is very much about protecting water quality as well as water resource. And the total value of the current round, the interventions accumulate to in the region of £10 million of investment. So this map, possibly Martin showed it earlier, shows collectively the catchment management work that's going on across the region through upstream thinking delivery. And the work that West Country Rivers Trust are doing are the areas in green, but also the area to the east, which is the River Otter catchment, where it was being run by FWAG, but ultimately, I'm sure you know, went to administration, and now we've absorbed that into our own projects. So the map also shows the connectivity between where works are being carried out and the abstraction points and the water treatment works of South West Water, so you can see how that equates. Before I go into detail on what West Country Rivers Trust are delivering, I think it's fair to mention and recognise the work of the other partners. Without going into a huge amount of detail, the Mires project, aiming to restore the hydrology and to restore that function, so trying to reverse the decline and the drying out of the peat to improve water storage capacity. And there's a huge amount of work that's already been achieved up until work up to 2010 in the first phase, which was started also along with Exmoor National Park. A number of surveys and ditching for re-wetting was carried out, which came to over 600 hectares of surveys and 64 kilometres of ditches. So that's making great headway. Also now we're also working, I say we, the Upstream Thinking Group, we're also doing work on Dartmoor to achieve the same sort of ends. Bearing in mind that there's a whole range of issues there, partnerships and interests that need to be taken account of. On Dartmoor you also have the military, it goes into the military zone, and there's also things like the archaeology and the heritage which needs to be taken account of. The other two main partners are the Devon and Cornwall Wildlife Trusts. Devon are running the Working Wetlands group. I know Mark's here somewhere. Hi. And so we actually overlap in the headwaters of the Tamar, and their thrust central idea really is for the protection of the coal measures, which are a species-rich grassland, which is a threatened habitat. It's an area that's also suffered through intensification from agriculture and draining for agricultural use. And Devon Wildlife Trust, through the Upstream Thinking Project, their team of advisors will give help, advice, training and support. And what they're aiming to do is to bring that habitat back into good management and good condition. And they're also facilitators, if you like, with working with one of the other partners, which is Natural England, to bring in ELS and HLS agri-environment scheme funding. And I'm pretty sure that they've already exceeded some of the targets already for that. Without going into a huge amount of detail, both the Mires projects and Devon Wildlife Trust are case studies in the delegate pack, so there's a lot more facts and figures included in there, and obviously websites if you want to read more. The other partner is Cornwall Wildlife Trust, which are way down in West Cornwall, and they're working in an area that's surrounding Drift Reservoir. Again, working with farms and smallholders to try and encourage them for the uptake of agri-environment streams, and also helping with further advice, farm plans, soil plans, etc. for good management, and also protecting water quality. And they've done some excellent work on tracing and trying to mitigate pesticide issues. So this map details more the areas that West Country Rivers Trust are working in for our catchment management work. The catchment management work is practical works that are operating on the ground at the moment. We're also working with South West Water for the catchment investigations, which are a further 17 catchments which we're researching, if you like, and carrying out scoping studies for potential future round in PR14. The areas that the West Country Rivers Trust are working in, which cover from the east Wimbleball Reservoir, the Tamar and the Foy, also cover the three strategic reservoirs for South West Water, which supply the majority of the South West. So the West Country Rivers Trust have 5 target catchments, 6 now with the Otter. Within the Tamar, that also encompasses the Upper Tamar Lakes and Rodeford Reservoir. They fall within the Greater Tamar, if you like. Our total budget for farm interventions is in the region of £2 million, and that standard intervention is at 50%. That is to say, we will offer a grant and we expect the farmer to invest a similar amount to make that investment and that commitment. The types of works that we carry out, we don't have a definitive list. It's very much tailored to the farm business, to their location. But some of the main interventions we carry out are obviously repeat works of fencing, buffering watercourses, livestock control, access restrictions, and yard infrastructure, be that slurry, silage, manure, housing, sheds, etc. And South West Water, by their own admittance, don't have a history of working with farmers at grassroots level, but the West Country Rivers Trust has done for many years, and also knows a lot of the farmers and those regions quite well through previous projects and previous initiatives. So, going back to our well-used map, the images on the left represent poor practice, or bad practice if you like, on farm, in the landscape, in the catchment. And as Nick was explaining earlier, we know many of those main issues. We can identify many of those main issues and sources. So to begin with, we're looking at the source, be that point source or diffuse pollution sources, which are at the start of the water quality concern. Primarily it's nutrients and soil mobilisation. So we know when our team of advisors are out on the ground, they know what they're looking for, they know how to approach that. So we have to start with the source, and then from the source we can identify the pathway and the connections of how that's being mobilised and how that's connecting with the watercourse. If we can understand the connectivity and give help and advice and mitigation, then what we aim to do is to disrupt and hopefully end those connections so that we are removing those sources from the receptor. And ultimately, the river, the stream, the watercourses act as a receptor. They're not only taking on those pollutants and issues in that site, it's also being transported downstream. And so the impacts, say, of pesticides will be felt further down the stream. They ultimately need to be dealt with by the water company at the treatment works, but they will also affect the biodiversity, water quality, etc. for the whole of that catchment. So in terms of West Country Rivers Trust catchment management process, our initial process is to first engage with the farmers. We need to identify who owns what, and that might be cold calling, it might be going on knocking on doors, it might be we tend to arrange an initial catchment meeting, an informal evening with farmers, word of mouth, invite the main landowners and get them around for a pint in the pub and explain to the captive audience what you're aiming to achieve, and to try and engage them and get their interest at the first level. The other thing that we're very keen to stress is the fact that our approach is 100% confidential. It's also 100% voluntary. If they decide they're not interested, they can walk away. We have no bearing on them, but often you'll find that peer pressure, and we have already seen this now that we're 2 years in, that farmers initially declined, not interested, are now coming back to us and saying, actually, I am interested. So the initial action by our advisors is to, once they've identified who's interested, is to arrange a visit. They spend an hour, maybe 2-3 hours, depending on the size of the operation, sitting, talking to the farmer about his farming operation, his aspirations, where he's aiming to go, and from there they can they'll carry out a whole farm survey, and they'll produce a farm plan that's a tailored, integrated farm management plan specifically targeted at that farm. And it will also need to take into consideration what their plans are. You know, do they have family that are intending to continue? Are they intending to expand? A lot of things that need to be taken into account. So the types of things that we're finding are the types of photos you've already seen. I mean, absolutely, with the farmer's permission, we undertake a survey, we'll walk around the entire site, it's completely confidential. We've already pointed out that we're not in any shape or form there to report them, we're there to help them, it's confidential. And the other thing to point out is that we're making recommendations for the protection of the raw water quality, but except for a very, very few instances, these people are not operating illegally. They are within the regulatory restrictions, if you like. They're not breaking the law. If they are breaking the law, if they have a pollution incident or a very severe issue, we will make no bones about pointing that out and pointing out how they can seek help. We won't fund them to get out of a problem where they're currently polluting and causing an actual pollution incident. So those are the types of things we're finding on the ground. It's quite common: poached ground, unrestricted livestock access, runoff, perhaps inappropriate practices, timeliness, maybe just caught out by the weather. But we're finding them across the region, and ultimately, of course, that connects to the waterways, the watercourses, and these are all photos that we've taken in the catchments we're working on. So you can see, again, the main issues are soil mobilisation, nutrient enrichment that's being moved and spread downstream. And that enrichment also causes issues with algae and algae growth, which South West Water can ultimately quantify in terms of what it costs them, increased cost for water treatment, for cleaning it up. As Nick was explaining, the increased amount of sludge extraction and removal, the costs involved in that. We also have, when we're going out on catchment in a sort of targeted approach, if you like, is that we can also use the data that we've obtained through South West Water, through the Environment Agency, and any modelling or mapping works that we've done prior to that stage to help us focus in on what we may see as problem areas. So the next stage, we've carried out a farm visit. We draft up a fully integrated farm management plan for the farmer, and we identify opportunities in there for them to make improvements, but we always stress the win-win opportunities. As Dylan was describing earlier, we make it as useful as possible for them to envisage how it can improve their farm business as well as improve the water quality. If they want to go ahead, they are requested to obtain market prices, a minimum of 3 like-for-like quotes, which they obtain from contractors to carry out the works that we've identified. Once they've obtained those, we as a team, the Upstream Thinking advisors and team in the office will sit down once a month, and we will go through any potential grant offers, and then we discuss the priority, if you like. You evaluate them to see what's the best spend for the funds available, and if we're happy to go ahead, we make an offer which is standard intervention at 50%. There is 2 legal documents that we need to proceed with at that stage. There's actually 3 levels. If it's a small grant of under £1,000, we offer a small grant agreement, which is a relatively simple, short document, 3 to 4 pages. If it is between £1,000 and £5,000, we raise a larger conditional grant agreement, which is about 15 pages long. It can appear daunting. Farmers often go off and consider it or seek advice, maybe from an agent, maybe from a lawyer. And that is essentially a legal agreement between ourselves, South West Water, and the farmer. If the works exceed, if the grant exceeds £5,000, sorry, moved too far, we also need a deed of covenant. So a deed of covenant ties in that legal interest on the property. So the terms of the agreement, the terms of the grant, maybe 10 years, maybe 25 years, depending on the infrastructure investment, and that lodges a legal agreement, and that ultimately is registered with the land registry. So should the farmer move, should they sell, those terms and conditions remain registered against that particular property. So I've got very little time left, Booth is telling me. I'm just going to quickly run through a couple of examples. So a grant under £5,000 identified a need to reduce livestock access. So they had a grant for £5,000. Total works came to about in the region of £10,000. There was no grant, there was no deed required on that grant because it was under 5,000, but they were able to successfully put in some fencing, exclude livestock, and protect that watercourse. Larger projects over £5,000. This one was a livestock yard where it was open, so there was increased rainfall adding to slurry, and it also meant it was he was able to in the future bring his livestock in and overwinter them. Covered area. That was a much larger project, a much larger build. He had a grant for £13,000, but the total works were 26. So obviously the farmer there has to make quite an investment himself, and because of the scale of the grant, there was a deed required with that, which is ultimately lodged with the land registry. The other outcome that we've had is last year the Catchment Sensitive Farming Officer on the Tamar was actually very well stretched. He was working in more than one catchment, and so we worked with Catchment Sensitive Farming to deliver information, advice and visits. And so a farm that was visited by one of our advisors was actually then given advice because he preferred to go for a Catchment Sensitive Farming grant. He was successful in his CSF grant, and he carried out the works with his own money, and CSF didn't decide to take up the upstream thinking. That's his personal choice. As I say, it's completely voluntary, but obviously he has less legal tie-in over that and for less duration. But it also meant that the advice that we've given has also helped in delivering raw water quality improvements on the ground and make good use of the available funds in the catchment. So on completion, hopefully we've got a much nicer picture of conditions on the ground. There is a suite of investigations and monitoring and sampling going on, so that in terms of quantity and quality we can to be a bit more defined about those improvements. That's something that Adrian's going to talk about shortly. And very briefly, in the 2 years that the project's been working, these maps show the inset is Wimbledon in the X, but these maps show the areas of land that have been farms that have been engaged in year one in yellow, in year 2 in red, and catchment sensitive farming areas that we've also visited and given advice on as well in purple. So in 2 years, bearing in mind we're approximately halfway through the project in current phase, we've visited nearly 200 farms. That's individual farms, that's not farm visits. Each farm may take 5, 10, 15 visits over the time of the project. So they've received farm plans and grant-aided projects. So we've seen at least £1 million of spend in grants, which has seen at least another £1 million match from farmers on that as well. So ultimately our aim for the future is to move from the situation on the left to the situation on the right to improve water quality, and we look forward to potential future round of PR14. Thank you.